This is Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur with your host, Lynn Freest. Lynn will share ideas and expert advice from people that are walking in your shoes and living their encore careers, where they want and at the pace they want. You'll start a company of one with confidence and knowledge to live a fulfilled life of freedom and ease. Lynn is a coach and leadership consultant whose mission is to show senior leaders and experts how to start something refreshing and new after a full career in the corporate environment.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the podcast, Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur. As always, I thank you for listening and sharing your time with me. This is episode 126, and it's Foundations for Being Remarkable, a conversation with Paul Axtell. Making the leap from being a corporate leader and expert into becoming a solopreneur can be daunting, but the rewards are great. You can work when you want, where you want, and do the work you love. And I can be that guide and thinking partner to help you on your journey. As your coach, I'll help you go farther and faster based on what I've learned from being on this journey for several years. If you're even having some thoughts about starting an encore career, please contact me and take the self-assessment quiz. The quiz will help you get some quick clarity around what might be possible for you in the future. And after you listen to the podcast, I encourage you to visit my website at lynnfreest.com and download the PDF as a guide to help you take the next steps in pursuing your encore career. Today, we're going to be talking with Paul Axtell, and he will share an overview of some of the key concepts he teaches in his wonderful class, Foundations for Being Remarkable. Paul has been a wonderful friend and teacher over the years, and I have found his insights to be continually useful, and they have dramatically improved my effectiveness both at work and at home. Some of the topics we're going to cover are how we can build an empowering perspective. Work and relationships happen through conversation. How do we have those effective conversations? How do we intentionally build and enhance our relationships with others? How do we create focus? You're already productive, but now how do you take that to the next level through use of focused work? Thank you, Paul, for being with us today, and I really appreciate your insights and wisdom. But always to lead off, I'd like you to introduce yourself and the work that you do and the journey that you've been on.
I don't know how many times I've been asked that, but I'm not sure that I really have a great answer. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I think I actually started working on this because I had so many personal flaws to get through, and I was aware of them, like I didn't speak in life. I was pretty much scared. So I was kind of like, okay, I got work to do. I just got work to do. So I've been very keen on the interpersonal side forever for myself. Then I think the second thing that happened is that I realized if I'm going to have a successful career, it's not going to be technology based. I'm not a great engineer. I'm good at solving problems. But I harken back to when you go through engineering school and they hire you, they're hiring a few people for their ability to deal with complex math and science, but mostly they're hiring people who got through the curriculum. They're hiring people with grit and persistence and resilience. So that's where I got. And then I became interested in people who didn't think they had permission to do what they wanted to do in the companies they work for. And for whatever reason, that was never an issue for me. It was like, ask for what you want and you're likely to get it. So I became very interested in how do you be really good in an organization? Two terms. One is overcoming your personal flaws, whatever they might be. And the other is not giving up any of your entrepreneur abilities because you work in a company. Then it's interesting. I started my own company, and 2 weeks ago, I was at dinner with 7 CEOs, small company CEOs, all engineering background. Not a single one of them knew when they left college they intended to start a company or be a CEO. It was just happenstance in every case. Somehow an opportunity came up. Now, they did have this ability to step out of the security of being in the corporate world and being on their own. But it's not like in the 8th grade, they knew they wanted to be a CEO or an entrepreneur. They more or less had that engineering background. And then an opportunity came up and they said, oh, okay, I'll do this. So I'm kind of fascinated at that because the world basically says, You should know what you're doing and you should follow your passion and you should have these visions of who you want to be in life. And I don't think that's how life works. I think you have the circumstances in front of you and then you choose. Now, I do think people should choose the risky approach more often. But anyway, that's where I've got. And then the other thing is if you look at this personal flaw, this development piece, I've really collected the 70 ideas that I think are most important to being good, in particular perspectives, but also then within the perspective, what are the critical variables? So that's where I am.
Yeah, and I know another thing I've always been impressed with is you have, being an engineer myself, the theme around process. In other words, there's some things you can do that if you keep doing them consistently will make a difference. And so I wonder if you could mention that.
Yeah, I'm also fascinated by the whole idea of being remarkable and that talent is overrated. We give way too much credit to talent. When you watch any event on television, you talk about how talented people are. The more correct answer would be, gosh, look how much practice they put in over 20 years. Because it's not talent, it's about practice. It's about work ethic. And it's about the attitude to do that practice and have that work ethic. And truly, there are some people that I love the movie Hidden Figures about the mathematicians, the women who are helping NASA. There are some people who are brilliant mathematicians. Their mind works differently than you and I do. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I like the notion that talent's overrated because it now means if you want to be good at anything, you don't have to rely on talent. All you got to do is put in the time. And I think that's one of the things people don't get. You could pick anything. And if you put in the time, you'll go past most people in the world pretty quickly. So, no, I happen to love practice too. So that makes it easier. In fact, in terms of golf, I would rather practice than play. Takes less time. I'm out there. So anyway, I think that whole idea about perspective, practice, preparation is important for people to get because it puts you in the game. You can play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I always remember the Fred Astaire quote. It took me 20 years to make it look this easy.
Yeah, exactly. I also don't think when you start putting in the practice, they don't keep track of their progress. So if you're not aware of how much you change over time, you lose this base of accomplishment that keeps you going. And if you look at people, they have yearly goals on development or they strive to do something, but they quickly forget who they were when they started. Mm-hmm. And so that keeps them from staying on the path.
And that's one of the things that in my audience, there are people who are leaders or corporate experts who are now launching off in their own career, their encore career, as it were. They forget how much expertise they have. It's become second nature to them. They almost have to go back and revisit, okay, I am an expert. Why is that? Because it's almost invisible to them in some cases.
Yes, it's a little bit like, I like baseball, so hopefully I'll be able to follow the analogy here. But the really true great hitters in baseball were not good batting instructors. They couldn't teach other people how to do what they did because they literally forgot what they learned or they didn't have the language for transferring it. And I think you're right. People who have expertise don't realize how good they are because they don't sit down and write about for themselves how good they are, what makes them good. And there's another conversation in there. A long time ago, I had a consultant. I was working for Monsanto at the time, and I was interviewing consultants to come in. And he says, Paul, do you see yourself being CEO of Monsanto someday? And I said, oh, no way. He says, okay, we got a problem then, because I don't know if I want to work for somebody who doesn't think they're capable of being CEO. And wow, really? It's like in that moment, he revealed all these thoughts I got myself, these limiting interpretations. So I think there's the question that you could ask your folks or people starting new careers, who am I to be a successful entrepreneur? Who am I to go start this business? And the answer doesn't come with a spreadsheet where you write the pros and cons. The answer really comes down to one question. It's probably better if people figure it out for themselves, but let's give the answer, which is, I've got something to say here. I've got something to bring to this. I'm good. And confidence is really sourced by that single sentence, I'm good. It's not based on anything else. It's just, I'm good. And the moment you're able to say that, then you also know it really. So being in touch with why you're good. Now, there's a different question. LinkedIn does it shallowly, like people like you for certain skills you've got. That's not the same thing as having somebody watch you perform or who has watched you perform. And they basically describe it, wow, this is what you do. I'm not sure why you do it, but this is what you do that really works. And so it's always useful to have somebody who knows you well to be able to speak at length about why you're good. That make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I just asked a colleague to do that for me not long ago, saying, okay, I seem to be doing a good job in this particular activity. Could you tell me why you think you might also think that that's true? Because it is hard to, like you say, you can't watch yourself perform very well.
Yeah, I think the other thing is people first go to accomplishments. Well, you've done this and you've done this and you've done this. That's not where we're looking. What we're looking is, how do you respond to questions? How do you open up conversations? How do you present yourself? If we go back to that earlier one about people leaving on their own, and the question about whether they're good, a lot of people have not figured out how do you promote yourself without bragging. And that's part of it. You've got to be able to say that you're good without coming across as arrogant.
Yeah. And again, that's one of the key things that I try to share with people is that as you go out now on your own and try to engage with people who could be clients or whatever, or ask them, it's not about your positions. It's not about your titles. You have to explain your value proposition to them in maybe a different way than you ever had to in the corporate world.
Yeah, which in the value proposition is you must have a product that's different than what's out there. Because I don't think the people that you're working with are into the whole commodity-based marketing, commodity product. They're not driven by that kind of thing. So it comes down to what precisely can Lynn provide that other people can't provide.
Yeah, the often example I use is people who have deep expertise in logistics. You have to be able to describe what that is. You're not just another spreadsheet user. You're not just another person who knows this or that. What's the thing you bring to logistics? Do you handle crises well? What is it that you've experienced?
Yeah, very good.
Paul, I wanted to come back around to the class that you've been teaching for many years that I know I've enjoyed many times, and that's your Foundations for Being Remarkable. And there's some key elements in that I know you teach often in corporate settings, but often now with other people. So the first one is the section on perspective. What general thoughts would you have, especially when people are making transitions into a new career, new job? What are some of the key thoughts you might share on perspective?
So let me just share some thoughts without necessarily making them flow. It's the easiest way to change your behavior. If you change your perspective, you have a different response. People have talked about perspectives. Do you think the glass is half full or half empty? That's a perspective. The one thing I think that the pandemic has done is made all of us aware of our mood and attitude day in, day out, because there's so many hits that we take. And we've lost access to some of the things that give us kind of an upbeat perspective. I think that's useful if you have the ability to know how to act when you don't feel like it. And then there are three ways into perspective. One is the one that you just wake up with. It's the historical one, the conditional one. So the pandemic is a condition that pretty much wears on us, gives us a less than healthy, less than positive perspective or attitude. And then you have your historical one, which is what you know about yourself already in terms of your general outlook on life. And those are the perspectives you've relied on forever. So, for instance, the one about practice, preparation and practice, that's a perspective that I have, which is if you put in the time, it'll always turn out. I actually got that from my dad. I think he's the first one who verbalized it. We were out fishing one day and I complained that we weren't catching anything. He says, Paul, the point is you got to put in your time. And I thought, that's exactly right. If you don't put in the time, nothing's going to happen. So there are certain activities that change your perspective. Learning something changes your perspective. Being in a great conversation changes your perspective. Owning your own business changes your perspective, which might be one of the big benefits of being out on your own in a second career, is you can drift in an organization and following the perspective of the people around you or what the culture of the organization provides. Once you're out of that, the perspective is yours. And there's something pretty exciting about trying to make a business successful. It's a very powerful perspective. I think what people do not get is the importance of conversation with respect to perspective. It's very hard sitting by yourself, locked into your bedroom, to generate a positive conversation unless you're trying to produce something while you're there, which is part of the problem with devices that we're pulled to because I don't want to be bored, but they don't add to a powerful perspective. So it's like short-term entertainment or short-term occupation of what I'm doing, but they don't help. They just don't help. Then I think the other phrase we can wrap this up with is that if you're not looking forward to something, find a new perspective. And I recommend that people get a collection of 7 to 10 perspectives. People do this already. They have, you've got that great picture of, looks like the Jackson Hole, the
Expo bin.
Tetons. Yeah. See, photographs do that. Quotes do that. They pull you into a perspective that you relate to, that you like. I would keep a list of the 7 perspectives that you can draw on, that you can remind yourself of when you need a shift. Give you a quick one. It comes from the Exotic Marigold Hotel movie. And the bartender said, everything will be all right in the end. If it's not all right, it's not the end. Which means, or I think Audrey Hepburn said, if you're going through hell, keep going. It's really that thing about being in action, being emotion. So if you look at people starting businesses, it really is about getting started and then maintaining momentum. And the perspective you're after is do something every day to maintain momentum. Just stay in action. I would have people come up with 7 to 10, and we do that in the workshop. What are the 7 perspectives either you got from your parents, you got in church, you decided on your own, or you got from the movies that reflect how you want to deal with life? So that's perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I know one that I had from a friend and colleague is, again, coming out of the corporate world, especially engineering and stuff, I'm risk adverse. And she said, Lynn, you got to really get used to practicing in public when you're doing this entrepreneurial thing, because this idea of never making a mistake is just not possible if you're actually trying to build something out in the public.
Yeah, no, we could talk for 4 hours about being risk adverse, because most people haven't really thought it through. Most people haven't inquired into what makes them uncomfortable. I remember when I was working for Monsanto, the president kept saying, I want people to take more risks. And so the question was, well, you mean bet the company risk? What? I mean, how risky? And so I went to him and I said, you have said 15 times in the last 2 months in speeches, you want more risk taking. What do you mean? And he said, oh, I misspoke. I want people to have a bias for action. I don't want waiting. I don't want perfect solutions. I just want a bias for action. And I've always thought that's good. You're either moving or you're not. Mm-hmm. You're either working on your health or you're not. You're either building your new business or you're not. It's either in action or you're not. So, yeah, very good.
Another thing you have in your class is the power around conversation. And again, I think that relates to, again, people leaving corporate world where there was a pattern of conversation, there was a structure around whatever, good or bad. But now all of a sudden, you're going to go out and you're going to be the one creating conversations. What are some of your perspectives on creating conversation?
Well, the first one is you got to treat conversation like it matters. And Mindy Hall, who wrote a book on intention, had a wonderful quote was, I want it to matter that we met. So if we go out for coffee, I want it to matter to you that we went out to coffee together. If you sat down and listened to me and asked me about doing this, I want it to matter that we had that conversation. Then I think it's about getting other people to reveal more about themselves. So people say, I'm not a network person. I can't mingle. Well, they need to get, it's not about talking. It's about asking a great question and then being quiet. That's the key to networking. So the question now is, how do you get people expressing themselves to you? That is the key thing. And then staying out of the conversation so they keep going. I play golf a lot. People like to play with me, not because I'm a good golfer, because we have great conversations. And so like just yesterday, I said, we started with the kind of the throwaway conversations. Well, did you stay here for Christmas or did you go home? And this guy says, well, I went home and gosh, I love my grandkids, but about 3 days is enough. 5 days is too much. And I could have done on the path about family and yeah, you get too much of them, but I didn't. I said, okay, how about, we got a couple hours here. How about telling me about each of your grandkids, what you love about them, what you like about them. And this guy talked, had to be 4 or 5 holes, one kid at a time. Now, I know when he goes home, he's going to feel good about that. He's got a different relationship with those kids. He's more likely to pick up the phone, how they're doing. But it's because I got him to reveal his thinking and share about those kids rather than slip into the conversation about, yeah, you can't be with family too long before you wish you weren't there. That's what people have to do. They have to know, how do you get people to go deeper?
Yeah, I remember reading a guy by the name of Edgar Schein that does what he called humble consulting. And he said, you really have to be more of a listener than a salesperson. You really have to be able to have them talk at length about what they're facing, because usually it's not the first problem. It's something they'll talk about later. But that whole idea of you're not selling yourself, you're trying to create a relationship and allow them to speak.
Yeah, you're trying to get people enrolled in you as a person, unless you have a product that they just have to have. Then it's not about you anyway. It's just about answering whatever questions they got that keep them from buying. So I think people don't get that it's all about the relationship, and people buy the relationship. They don't buy the product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I remember in the conversations, the thing that always struck me, and every time I do it, is your exercise where you ask people to speak at length. And if it's only 2 or 3 minutes, that is so uncomfortable to people and so unusual for people that it has, I think, almost a magical impact, just having that structure.
Yeah, there's 2 points there. One is, without the structure, you don't get it. That is, without the setup, the protocol for how we're going to have the conversation, you don't get it. And the other thing is that most of the world operates in a back and forth conversational mode. So there's no time to speak at length, and people are interrupting and changing the conversation. So that's the other thing. It's just, if you talk about building relationships and creating conversations, you have to ask for what you want. So just as you asked me to start by catching people up about my career, I would go into, if I was selling something, and I do work a lot with financial advisors and people selling financial stuff, I'd go in and say, hey, how about tell me 10 minutes? What's going on for you? And keeping you up at night, parts of your business are going well, how your kids are doing. I've got 10 minutes and I just want to learn as much as I can. Would you do that for me? In 10 minutes, people can reveal a lot. And if the thing is, if you pay rapt attention to somebody, people do not make trivial comments. So they're going to reveal something. Reveals may be the bad word. They're going to express something that they didn't usually express. And 10 minutes, you just got to find something else and find something else. And it is magical because people go places they didn't intend.
Yeah. It's like last night I was working with some people that the guy proposed that he said, you want to try to find out what are the nighttime problems people have, not the daytime problems. Because what's keeping up at night is different than what they'll think about in the daytime as far as what their problems are. And he says the nighttime ones are the more important ones often if you can get to them.
Yeah. And one of the ways you get to them is say, what keeps you up at night? It's not all that mysterious. Now, you've got to have kind of that, I think, safe way of being with people. Yeah, some people have too much polish, or they really are, in terms of sales, they're waiting to make their pitch. You're not safe. You're not open if you're waiting to make your pitch. I worked with a bunch of financial people, and I said, when you go into a client's office, what do you take in with you? Well, we got our briefcases and I usually have my iPad so I can show them a little PowerPoint. And then I said, and do you have a bunch of brochures for the product you're going to sell? Do you put that on the table? Yeah. I said, people hate to be sold to. And that stuff out there says you are waiting to sell to me. So I'm not too interested. So I said I would go in with nothing but a blank piece of paper, a pad, and say, I just want to get to know you. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you. What's keeping you up at night? Because if you don't have anything, then they don't anticipate that you're just there waiting to sell. But that's a perspective change to go into a conversation with no place to get to other than to get you to talk.
Absolutely. Another thing you mentioned in your training and stuff is, well, it's around personal and group effectiveness. But in this case, thinking more about the personal effectiveness, what are some of the key elements? I think you said you have 7 key ideas you normally work with on helping people with effectiveness. And I ask this because, again, as people launch themselves into a new entrepreneur career, they actually have to reinvent their effectiveness because the structures, the things that they did in the corporate world, all of a sudden aren't there. I can sit down in the morning and it's noon and I still haven't really gotten anywhere unless I create some new structures for myself.
Yeah, I think the number one answer is deadlines. If you don't have a deadline, you're not going to be good. Then I think it's about creating your own environment, your own structure for being able to immerse yourself in whatever you need to do. There's just too many distractions. And the corporate world as a structure has something that keeps you moving, which is called meetings. You're going from this meeting to that meeting and you're talking to this person. So it's got the structure that keeps you moving. Once you pull out of that, I would set up at least one conversation a day to forward a project that you want to move forward. Because when you talk about a project and you have a conversation, it changes your attitude in the moment, things come up. I would also spend 45 minutes a day thinking about something you need to be thinking about. If you look at being productive, what conversations with what people would move you forward? What time alone would move you forward? Then I think the other thing people don't realize they need is you always need somebody, maybe it's more important in the training field, I'm not sure. You need somebody who's farther down the road than you are with respect to what you're trying to do. Guru is not the right word, but it's like somebody who's your source, which in some ways, Lynn, you can be for people starting out on this encore career. Lynn's my source for starting this process and staying in it. So the question that I would have for everybody, who's your source? Now, in an organization, I think it's the veteran engineers. It's the senior sales folks. And I actually don't like the word mentoring anymore because mentoring is about giving advice. And you're not actually, there are times when you need mentors, but for the most part, this is who's your source that you can go to when you just need to talk. That's, I think, the relationship I'd like to have. At some point, that's where kind of I am. I no longer have any sources of people that I think are way out in front of me. So I go to books. I read a lot on people who have done the source work on particular things, whether that's attention or I just found an article called Your Attention Didn't Collapse, It Was Stolen. And maybe 10 pages, but I'm very interested in the whole thing about technology working against our attention. So the other thing I think people don't realize is you should have books that you rely on to get you in a good place as well as trigger your thinking. So I think the other thing about being good and being effective is knowing what you need to do to take care of yourself. And there's way too much written about taking care of yourself physically, emotionally. I'm more interested in how are you feeling right now? And if you're not really energetic, if you don't have the ability right now to sit down and focus, what would alter that? That's the answer. Is it a walk? Is it a great conversation? Is it music? Is it getting away and writing? So I walk, but I walk without music. I walk without headsets and I walk. Sometimes I'll go, and here's what I'm going to think through while I go walk. So sometimes I've got a problem to solve when I head out there. Most of the time I just head out and see what my mind does. But I would put that in the category of how much time alone do you need to take care of yourself? And then what triggers your thinking?
Yeah. And I think, and you drew that together about having conversations or people with a source. I recommend, because I've experienced this myself, I work with colleagues, or they sometimes are called masterminds or peer groups or whatever it may be, but it's people who are on the journey also. But I think that's important for people who are starting out as entrepreneurs to have some sort of a new network of friends, because often the corporate network is maybe not available anymore, or it's just got a different mindset. So I encourage them to, as I have found myself, I need to go out, and I actually belong to a couple of groups of people that not only inspire my thinking, but hold me accountable. But then they provide those conversations, again, help really sharpen, what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. There's other peer group coaching. Clearly, if you're a young supervisor, you need a group of supervisors, not to josh and have fun with, but gosh, I've got this person, I'm not sure what to do with them. I've tried this, to think out loud with folks. Mm-hmm. It's also why I still like teaching classes, or I write a weekly blog. And just yesterday, I got a question. So I wrote one about why interrupting is not useful. And so I got the question from this woman who said, well, what can I do if I'm the person being interrupted all the time? Now, see, I love that because I haven't answered that question before. So just engaging with her by putting out, so, well, here's what comes to mind. I don't know the answer because people are too complicated, but here's what comes to mind. She has caused me to sharpen my own thinking on something. Yeah, I don't think we've got to a place, particularly in the corporate world, where when you have conversation, it's about moving something or advocating something or selling something. We don't have this ability to walk in and say, I'm wrestling with something. I wonder if we could just talk. And that's where I'd like the mentor thing to get to, or your relationship with 10 senior engineers. Can we have coffee? I just need to talk. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other aspects you talk a lot about are focus. And you've mentioned this a couple of times already. But I think, again, that's a piece where how to focus, when to focus, what are the conditions. I think devices in particular are great distraction machines for us, but almost anything can be. What are your ideas on creating focus for yourself?
I think people ought to read, there's a book called Deep Work. And then he's got a new book. I'll grab it here for a second So the author is called Cal Newport, and this is his new book called Digital Minimalization, Choosing a Focused Life in a Noisy World. I think you have to spend 3 or 4 hours reading somebody who's done all the research, reading somebody who's put it together for it to get into you that this is something you have to do. Then I think one needs to have some environment where there are no distractions. If we set up for a podcast, you and I make sure I tell the lawn people don't come today, and Cindy's in the bedroom. We don't have any music on or anything. I think there's some myths out there. One is that you can multitask. You can switch between things quickly. Whereas the literature, basically, if a text comes in and you check that text, you're gone. And if the text is about something that has reached you, you're distracted for 15, 20 minutes, and maybe you're distracted until you go deal with that. Music, like teens think that I study better if I have my music on. That's not true. Now, you start to say, what's my evidence for that? If you look on Spotify, they've got focus music. They've got music that's so bland that it doesn't catch you. I think the other thing is intense work on things. This is also Cal Newport's idea, but if you had 3 2-hour periods a week where you were diving deep on what you're working on, a new presentation or developing new materials, and you have someplace to go where you don't have any distractions and you can get lost in it, those 3 periods, that's 6 hours a week, would drive you forward faster than anybody else. And it applies in golf. If you go with a deliberate plan for practicing, get in, practice, and get out, you'll do better than just going and spending time up there. So I've mentioned about putting in your time, but it's got to be putting in time deliberately. So then I think it's a little bit of a segue, but if you're in conversation and I want to pay attention to you, I've got to tell myself, I got to pick something to listen for, because we normally just listen for comprehension, or we listen judgmentally. I like it, don't like it, true, false. But if I'm listening for what I can learn about you, if I can listen for what are you committed to? And if I can listen for what are you struggling with, I've got to pay attention to in a different way than if I'm just listening. And particularly for people starting out, I would listen for those two things. What can I learn about you when I have coffee with you? And what are you committed to? And what are your concerns about those things you're committed to? I was with this group of 7 CEOs, and somebody wanted to do an icebreaker. And so they had everybody say, what job did you have when you were in high school? So we did that, and it was fun, and people had interesting jobs. Then I basically said, okay, so we know about your high school jobs. I want to know what decisions you regret, what job related, company related, running a business. And it was a whole different level conversation than what job you had in high school. So the point being, how do you get people to change their focus by asking them questions? That's where I'm trying to get to it. If you go and remember back to the thing about I wanted to matter that we met when we had a conversation. Question is, how do I get you talking about something that would answer that question? That's the thing here. And I bet you've got people who are a little bit like me. My first move in life is short answers. Did you stay around here over Christmas? Yes. But I've trained myself to say, okay, and we visited a bunch of grandkids 2 weeks before, and I went hunting with my daughter, Amy, and give them something to work with. So some of the people who have the same flaw I do, which is I'm quiet, don't talk about myself much, we've got to change that. We've got to reveal more about ourselves because that's what people want. People want to be connected, and you don't get connected without somebody sharing something that matters.
Absolutely. And that's interesting. And even in my corporate life and career, I'll say many of the relationships were very superficial because it was just about activities at work and stuff. But on rare occasions, there were people you ran into or conversations that you had where you learned a whole lot more. And I think that's always important because we're all very complex people. The surface conversation or the surface discussion probably isn't really helping us move things ahead since we're just dealing at the surface on those things.
Yeah. And if the only place we're having conversations where we connect with people is in a meeting, then we're trying to connect with people in an environment that's inherently not safe. People are going to be guarded. So you got to go to coffee or you got to set up a Zoom conversation, both to produce something, I think, but it's also, let's just spend some time getting to know each other. So yeah, I don't think people get that the amount of relationship that you and I have determines the safety of the conversation going forward. And that safety determines what I'm willing to tell you.
Yeah, in terms of, I remember the old story about an American group were going over to negotiate a contract with some Japanese, and Japanese kept saying, let's go play golf. And after 2 days of playing golf, the Americans were just totally frustrated. And they said, when are we starting to negotiate? And the Japanese said, we already have started.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good story. The other thing I don't think people realize is how connected you can get in 10 minutes. But if we can get people talking about something that matters to them and you and I can stay out of the conversation, pay attention, be supportive, encouraging, maybe ask a couple of follow-up questions, we can connect in 10, 12 minutes. And then just imagine if we had that same kind of approach and we were together for 2 days, we'd really be friends.
That brings me back to the classes you've taught for years and that I've been involved in, that it's always amazing. In most of these classes, the people weren't colleagues. They were maybe in the same company, but they weren't necessarily friends or even knew each other. And then more recently, when we did some on Zoom, again, these were people who were, in a sense, total strangers. It was amazing the connection that was made just even in the first few exercises or the first few hours of those classes, and then how it kept building.
Yeah, and I think one of the kind of unrevealed thoughts is people want to connect. I mean, we keep talking about we got to be connected and we got to find out how people can be. No, that's their preference. People want to be connected. So all we got to do is get pretty good at an opening move and listening, and people will respond. Some people, the only place they can talk in life is when they go to a therapist. And I think therapy is a very powerful tool. But it'd be nice if you and I had some of those same moves in conversation that get practiced in therapy. because people would just come alive when they're with us if they did.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I do want to leave a little time for you to describe the class you're putting on. You're offering it for the first time here to the general public, and I'd like to have you share a little bit about what you're thinking and what the class is about.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you. I did do a couple public courses when I was trying to figure out how to do the in-class on-site courses virtually. So I did a couple to experiment and figure it out. I'll say this. It's not the same as being in a room with people because there's less safety online than there is in a room. There's a kind of an intimacy with being in the same room. Plus, I miss people being able to walk up on break and say, I've got a question. I don't want to ask it in front of the class, but could you somehow touch on this? On the other hand, I can get access to people that I don't have access to. I just did a program for a company across the country. I think we had 70 people, and everybody's in a different place. So there's some virtual benefit. I think the other thing about virtual training is we don't have to do 8 hours in one day. So there's more time for people to get an idea and then think about it overnight, practice it with their family or with their colleagues. And for some people, it's a better way to learn. Having a cup of coffee, got their jeans on. There's not that pressure to maintain some kind of physical presence that sometimes in the classroom can get in the way. So there's pros and cons, but I know it can be really good. It's 12 hours. So what I'm after is 12 contact hours. So we're splitting it up into 3 4-hour mornings. I like that because the human mind can only handle about 6 hours of anything without changing. So 4 hours, it's a place to be with yourself. Yeah, there's some stuff going on and there's some short interactions with people. There's no case studies. There's no hour-long group studies. There might be some 8 minutes. I want you to talk with 2 or 3 other people for 8 minutes, but it's mostly to hang out with yourself and watch these ideas be presented in front of you and then judge them based on 2 things. Does that resonate with my own experience? And is it something that's currently missing in my life? And if I put it in, I think it would make a difference. So, example, deadlines. You and I perform really well up against a deadline. You and I are better up against a deadline than any other time in life. Okay, so that's the idea. Does that resonate with your own experience? Oh yeah, I remember in college, I stayed up all night. And do you have enough deadlines to produce what you want in life? These 70 ideas, they're all available in the reference manuals. I don't know which ones we'll cover. I know 10 that we have to cover because they're just too important, like listening. But most people, I would say, get the following. Number 1, I can change my perspective. Number 2, conversation matters, and I haven't been thinking about it like that. We raise kids with conversation. Our relationship is just conversations. Moving my business forward is about conversations. Handling myself in groups is about conversation. So conversation matters. Within that, it's all process skills. The ability to set up a conversation, conduct the conversation, and wrap up the conversation, which is the most important competency in any organization, process skills. Relationships, being intentional about relationship versus just having what happens. Seeing the connection between great conversation and great relationships. Focus. Most of the people I know what they need to focus on. The question is, this conversation we started earlier, how can you go deep? And how many hours a day are you going deep? And as well as taking away from people the notion that multitasking is okay and that devices move you forward. For instance, PowerPoint destroys conversation. It eliminates questions. It makes audiences passive. So why do I like this conversation? Because I want to confront some things that people are taking for granted. Not so that you stop doing PowerPoint, but you start to be thoughtful about when am I going to do it and what's the best way to do it. So that's basically it. It's about one way that I like to talk about it. I think it's possible to be 5 times more productive in terms of accomplishment, not activity. 5 times more accomplishment, work less hours and be less stressed. I think that's doable. And I also think people come out of this and with just the listening tool, they turn around most of the important relationships in their life.
Absolutely.
So we're going to do it 3 times, late January, late February, late March. People just send me an email. I'd be happy to enroll them. Love to have them. We got plenty of room.
Great.
So,
and we will have your contact and your email information in the show notes. And so we'll share that with people. And before we go, I just wanted to mention that you're also an author. So it's what I feel some very impactful books. The Meetings Matter is a book, and I think you've done some different takes on that too. And then the other one I really love is 10 Powerful Things to Say to Your Kids. And that's a book that I've used and shared with others. And here again, we talk about things in the work context a lot, but here's just, or even more important, is to how do you put these ideas into action with your children? I think all of those are things. We'll share links that they can connect with you and get those books too.
Great. Well, thank you, Lynn. It was a good conversation. I enjoy talking with you. I like talking about ideas that are useful to people. So thank you very much for the invitation.
You're welcome. Thank you. Again, many thanks to Paul for sharing an overview of some of the concepts he teaches and all the different things that you can do right now to help you become more effective. Just as a quick review, some of the topics we covered were: how do we go about building an empowering perspective in life? Work and relationships happen through conversation. How do we make those conversations more effective? How do we intentionally build and enhance our relationships, both at work and at home? And then focus. While we are already productive, how can we use the power of focus to really take us to the next level? Now, in addition to this, Paul is hosting 3 sessions of virtual classes where he will be building on these ideas. And these classes will be offered in January, February, and March. I have attended these sessions, along with hundreds of others over the years, and have found them to be some of the most impactful concepts and learning and training that I've ever received. So I encourage you to consider joining in on these sessions. Paul's contact information will be listed in the show notes. And again, I encourage you to email him and get on the list to go to these classes. So finally, remember, with an Encore career, the rewards are great. You can work when you want, where you want, and do the work you love. You have the time, attention, and money to make this leap, so let me help you make it. Again, if you're having thoughts about starting an Encore career, please feel free to contact me and to take the self-assessment quiz. And after you listen to the podcast, I encourage you to visit my website at linfrias.com, download the PDF as a guide to help you take the next steps in pursuit of your Encore career. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.